The topic is Pakistan's managing Pakistan's debt in a current and post-COVID world. It's a highly extensive subject. So I'm going to try to divide this talk into three basic parts. The first being Pakistan's fiscal deficit and the upcoming challenge to finance it. The second would be the recent external debt relief and restructuring, which we've seen in the debt service suspension initiative, which seems to have provided some relief on the external side. And the third would be developing the domestic debt markets and the role the capital markets and the exchange platform has with respect to that. Raman Saab and Farooq Saab already discussing that, so we're going to touch on that as well. The recent energy sukuk and how future transactions can help bring in depth to our secondary markets. And fourth, if we have time, the foreign portfolio phenomena in the secondary bond markets and how we can fully leverage that in the financial system. So I would like to start. Avred साहब आपसे शुरू करते हैं. पाकिस्तान की फिस्कल डेफिसिट पे आ जाते हैं. अभी जो गवर्नमेंट ने जो टारगेट सेट किया है, which is 7% of GDP for financial year 2021. But according to Fitch ratings, in their comments last week, they feel that the GDP debt to GDP ratio can reach 9.5% in the outgoing fiscal year and possibly 8.2% in the next fiscal year. So it's the Fitch projection is a little bit higher than what we saw in the budget. It is a challenge, no doubt. How do you see this top line number? And do you think what are the challenges to ensure that we stay between that 7% range?
First of all, a quick question. Can we speak in Urdu or English? Are we free to do that, or should it be English preferably?
So that's a very good question. And I think इसके ऊपर हम decide करते हैं कि जितना हम उर्दू में रखें बेहतर रहेगा. I'm sorry, मैंने introduction English में दे दिया है, लेकिन whatever you're comfortable with, अगर आप उर्दू में
कोई foreigners तो अभी participate नहीं कर रहे.
Right now, right. That's right now. As of now, we might have a foreign audience, but I will only find out how much that percentage is after the talk when I monitor it. So, मेरे ख्याल में let's keep it whatever you are comfortable with. जैसे whichever language you're comfortable in, let's proceed with that.
All right. I would prefer English then, if you expect a few foreign audience also.
Bismillah.
The fiscal deficit, you are absolutely right, and the concern raised by Fitch is valid. Fiscal deficits are currently way too high than what these should be. Pakistan has a fiscal responsibility law also, which says that fiscal deficit in any one financial year should not be more than 3.5% of GDP. I think 3 to 4% of GDP is like an international benchmark. It's like a ceiling for the fiscal deficits. If a government wants its finances to be sustainable. So we also feel that the fiscal deficits right now are very high, and these must come down over the next few years. Thankfully, the government is now committed to greater fiscal discipline, helped by the IMF program and helped by some other international multilateral institutions like World Bank and Asian Development Bank also. But still, you see the deficit budgeted for next year is in the range of 7% of GDP, and there are definitely risks for a fiscal slippage of 1 to 1.5% of GDP. So I would not say that the concerns raised by Fitch are baseless. But I would like to emphasize that the government is committed to bring the fiscal deficit down. Since it was not possible to reduce the expenditure, so the government has set an ambitious revenue target. The recent spread of the pandemic in Pakistan has not helped So definitely the GDP figures are being revised downwards, and the fiscal balance, the fiscal deficit is now projected to be higher. But these things happen. Uh, what's important is that the government is committed to greater fiscal discipline. Um, and on our part, the debt office is keeping its fingers crossed and hoping that the fiscal deficit will turn out to be within the limits set by
Yes,
the government.
absolutely. Jitna 7% say, I suppose, as close they are between the 7 and 8% range, and they're below the Fitch target, it makes your job at the debt office a lot easier. First up, do you have anything to add with respect to the target and the external rating agencies? Just seem to be projecting it a bit higher for next year.
Gee, thank you, Naran, and thank you for inviting me to this webinar. It's a very important and interesting time, and Savarayat Saab ne kaha कि I think the government is committed to trying to maintain fiscal discipline, but to be honest, it's an almost impossible task right now. Not just for the government of Pakistan, for any government. I mean, we are making our own budget right now for next year at PSX, and any business cannot really plan and budget properly. And I can't even imagine the impossible task the budget makers have to do it for a whole country. So I think as long as the commitment is there and the government, we just saw, literally 15 minutes ago, another rate cut by the
Yeah.
state bank, and every country in the world is taking these actions. So I think the most important thing for the Ministry of Finance, for the central bank, for the budget makers is to be really alert, and it's really important to stay flexible, बिकॉज हो सकता है अगले महीने सिचुएशन बेहतर हो जाए और आप चीज़ों को टाइटन अप करना शुरू कर सकते हैं वापस. हो सकता है अगले महीने खुदा ना खास्ता things are different and you have to be flexible to be able to respond. So I think it's the countries that will be successful coming out of this crisis will be countries that remain alert and flexible and are able to take the policy measures as they are needed. बिकॉज अगर आप चीज़ों को ज़्यादा लूज कर दें, बजट डेफिसिट आपका ज़्यादा बढ़ जाए, तो यू कैन रिकवर इट फ्रॉम इट फेली क्विकली. आप चीज़ों को टाइटनिंग अप इज़ मच ईजियर देन ट्राइंग टू रिकवर फ्रॉम इकोनॉमिक डेविस्टेशन, विच कैन टेक ईयर्स. Tomorrow we find everything is okay and inflation is going up. It takes one meeting for 5 minutes to jack up the interest rates, or to have another, a lot of questions have been asked, will there be another mini budget? Every country in the world is having mini budgets. You see the trillions and trillions of dollars of fiscal incentives and monetary operations that central banks are taking in developed countries, because that is the very, very serious circumstances in which we are living. So just to conclude, I think to my mind, the success of the government is not कि budget deficit क्या होता है आखिर में, but how quickly and properly they've been able to respond to changing circumstances.
Yeah, that's thanks for bringing that up, Farooq Saab, because we are seeing the government act now. The central bank example. The central bank, just as we spoke while I was preparing for this talk, 10 minutes before the talk started, the central bank cut the rate by 100 basis point. It took the benchmark discount rate by 1%. आमिर अल्ताफ साहब ने ये सवाल पूछा है, ये अब्दुल रहमान साहब से मैं पूछ लेता हूँ. So the central bank is acting, and this is not the first time it's happened that we have seen a rate cut happen without the timetable, separate from the timetable of the 2 weekly monetary policy meeting. So this is the second time it's happened. So they are acting with respect to keeping the data in mind, specifically the inflationary data, which is declining. Amir Altaf साहब का सवाल है, Avred साहब, will these aggressive rate cuts which we have seen, now it's 5.25% since the monetary easing started, will they ease in curtailing the fiscal deficit?
Yes, you're right, because our interest expenditure is directly linked or affected by the central bank's policy rate. So you're right, when the central bank reduces the policy rate, the interest expenditure for the future goes down, and as a result, the fiscal deficit also lowers. That's correct.
Yeah. So it's good to know that the relief is being provided from the autonomous central bank. Uh, there's another, just to move on, we've discussed the fiscal deficits, and I think both of you primarily agree that as long as you're flexible, uh, that is where the objective is. Another thing where the government has been proactive is the debt service suspension initiative. Now, just to educate our audience, the second largest saver amongst the DSSI countries would be Pakistan, and apparently we save around 2.4 billion from the debt service suspension initiative. And this, of course, is backed by G20, the World Bank, IMF, and Paris Club, as Ray Saab was mentioning, and relief and support partners. So the government is proactive on the external side for their debt structuring as well. These are not write-offs. These are simply restructuring the timetable of the servicing. Any comments and on how this can provide relief on the external side? And will this relief provide the government that space to possibly go for more Euro bonds and Sukuks in the international market?
I would request my colleague and friend, Mr. Umar Zahid, to answer this question, because he is more updated on the external debt issues than I am. Umar is
Absolutely.
the director of the debt office.
Absolutely, Umar Saab, thank you. Umar Saab, thank you for joining us, and I'd love to hear your views on DSSI and the future of our international debt service.
So we have total around 9 billion payment due in this fiscal year. So out of that 9 billion repayment, around 2 billion is principal repayment against the debt service initiative against the G20 countries. So remaining, we are left with $7 billion US, and this 7 billion, out of the $7 billion US, around $3 billion we owe to the China, which is actually the refinancing. So effectively, around $4 billion is required to be paid in this fiscal year. And the government is expecting much more inflows from the multilateral and bilateral development partner in this fiscal year. So effectively, we would be having a good amount of external inflows in fiscal year 2021, this fiscal year. So effectively, this DSSI initiative will help us a lot in reducing our gross external financing requirement, which was actually due in this fiscal year. And I would like to say that we are also planning to have a Euro bond of around $1.5 billion in this fiscal year.
Okay.
So in the last fiscal year, we had the maturity of $1 billion.
That's
although we were not, yeah. But in this fiscal year, we don't have any maturity on account of Euro bond issuance.
Okay.
So that $1.5 billion will add to our external financing. So
are there any?
Good, yeah.
Are there any Islamic offerings which you also have in mind for the international market?
Yeah, we are actually planning to have both Sukuk and Eurobond, and the size budgeted is 1.5 billion, but we may go for higher in case there's a requirement.
Okay. And how do you feel? How is the international market responding, in your opinion, right now? In terms of आपकी नजर हम लोगों से काफी ज़्यादा होती है. Do you think maybe if we cut the financial year to, let's say, the calendar year, do you think that the market right now has that absorbed capacity for the frontier and emerging markets right now, where we can possibly negotiate and raise more than we expect?
So we had a meeting with JP Morgan 2 days ago.
Okay.
And in that meeting, we were briefed that yields has declined significantly to the existing levels around. So we are having yields of around 7% against existing issues of Euro bonds, and our advisors are proposing us that there will be a window of emerging market, although emerging market has started issuance of Euro bonds, and they also propose us that in July to September we may have a good chance of issuing the Euro bond. This is what they are proposing, but obviously we will see the opportunity window. We have a MTN program in place. We may go for multiple tranches if required. And we are also planning to, as I have already explained, that we are planning to have both Eurobond and Sukuk in the international capital market, provided the opportunity is available.
Is there anything which might be planned for overseas Pakistanis? I know there was something which was planned last year and we only managed to raise around 15, 20 million. But is there any other structured products which you might have in mind to cater to specific communities or specific institutions or high net worth individuals, which might not raise the same quantum, but it does help in raising a bit?
So we introduced Pakistan Now certificate. You are right that we were able to get around 50 million US dollar in that instrument over the period of last 1.5 year. But Government of Pakistan, in consultation with the Central Directorate of National Saving, is going to issue overseas Pakistani certificate now. Now, this certificate, the feature of this certificate is available on the Finance Division website, and it is 3 year and 5 year, 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months instruments. Pakistan Now certificate was for 3 year, 5 year, for 3 year and 5 year. But this will be a short-term instrument, and it will offer a very competitive rate. So,
makes sense. So after studying the market, you've decided to go for the shorter term instrument to make it more attractive. Just to round up, and before I go to Farooq Saab, to clear the information which you just gave for the audience, we're expecting, so the total is 9 billion, less than 2 billion from G20, and the Chinese refinancing is 4 billion for the financial year. Is that correct?
Around 3 billion, yeah.
Around 3 billion. Around 3 billion. Thank you so much. I think this is very, very, please go ahead. Sorry.
So, so effectively, we are having a maturity of around 4 billion, which we need to refinance, and keeping in view the existing multilateral and bilateral commitment, we are expecting much more than that.
Fantastic. So it looks like thank you for sharing the external debt financing plan. Folks, have any comments? It seems like the alignment and the reconciliation seems to be on track from the debt office.
It seems like that. I think on the external front, with the relief that is there, both from our multilateral partners as well as the G20 restructuring that has been done, it seems that things seem to be under control. Both the import, export, and the remittances are. There is uncertainty. There's nothing you can do about it. But I think those are the other areas that the government needs to keep a focus on. That how do we continue जो budgetary measures भी लिए हैं to make sure that issues that our exporters may be facing are rectified as early as possible. At the same time, keeping a very tight control on imports. I believe. The State Bank and the other banks are continuing to work on making it easier for remittances. Hopefully this year the external side seems to be well covered as the situation stands right now. And when they go for the Sukuk and the Euro bond issue, that'll be a good test, and inshallah, if that goes through successfully, that'll restore a lot of confidence, in the strategy and from the market.
Yeah, and we've got some gold information that the advisors to the debt office feel that 7% was a benchmark which matured, and this time it could be a bit lower. We'll go back to the external debt side again. Let's just talk about the local market for a bit. I know Vred Saab and you've had a pretty successful partnership when it comes to launching the Islamic Sukuk on BACS, which has been around for a very long time, to be quite honest, in the stock exchange, on the exchange. But it has never been utilized for bookkeeping and price discovery as it was for that Sukuk. So yes, there seems to be a plan from the external side, but on the local side, we have been in a bit of a cycle or a circle, as you can say, where we have these, where we have the large commercial banks. They have a huge appetite, and that appetite the government seems to be filling that. But on the corporate side and on certain transactions which can be structured and the price discovery and the bookkeeping can be more efficient on the exchange, we've had one success. Are there plans to take this further and deepen the market and increase the investor base now? I'll let Farooq Saab go first, and then Reman Saab can probably add after that.
Certainly. Thank you. And The Sukuk issue really, I hope inshallah will be it is a landmark transaction, and hopefully inshallah it will set a trend for the development of the domestic capital markets. And I'm not talking about the government market directly, which is primarily T-bill and PIBs, and that is a large market that's functions quite well. I'm talking about the corporate debt and the kind of power holding Sukuk issue that was done. And it's for the, as you mentioned, the first time that the BATS is a secondary market trading platform, just to clarify for your listeners. And what was the innovation here was that we developed the software for book building for the debt office and for the Sukuk issue. And as you know, book building is the way जब ये लोग international issues भी करते हैं हमारे Ministry of Finance, all of them are done on a book build basis, whether equity or debt. तो equity markets में तो हमारा book building काफ़ी establish हो गया था, and we did the first one back in the 90s for GDC equity issue हुआ था book building में, but debt में कभी नहीं हुआ था ये. So we developed the new software, as I was thanking Mr. Varaj, and was instrumental in giving the guidance and having the faith that we will do it. And essentially what the book building does is that it allows you price discovery, and it creates competitive tension in the market. So it's very simple in principle, but a little bit complex in execution. But the principle is very simple. Instead of doing a bought deal with a group of banks, where it's difficult to do price discovery, where it is difficult to create that competitive tension, you open it out. You have a diversified investor base, and no participant knows, what the other person is bidding. And the government, mashallah, improved its pricing by almost 90 basis points, which is huge. I mean, दो चार चार basis points के ऊपर issuers push investors, and 90 basis points so I'm very glad that it happened. And what it has also done is that mutual funds, corporates, pension funds, insurance companies, all of them have also come into this issue. So as the issue gets formally listed, we are very hopeful that there will be a lot more secondary market trading on the BATs than there used to be. And then hopefully, we are in discussion with Varaj Saab that there'll be other issues that will come on a similar basis. So usse hamara yield curve, and the secondary market yield is what really then guides the issuer for their new primary market issuance, because वही एक benchmark बन जाता है. So as these issues come on, after some time, the market will get more and more transparent and more competitive, which is good and more investors will be able to benefit from such attractive investment opportunities. So it's good for issuers, it's good for investors, it's good for the market. So really, it's been thrilling to work on this, and we are looking forward to both such issues, and also I hope over time some of the discrepancies that exist in our market, which I know the debt office is also looking at on the CDNSS side. Those will also become more market related, and perhaps some of them will also, new instruments will come as listed instruments. So I'm very excited of development of the domestic debt market. And the PD side, sorry, just to conclude, just the PD side, the Treasury bill PIB market, that's a completely separate thing. And I think maybe in the next question we'll come to that.
We're going to come to that. We're going to come to that, और उसके भी yield curve और उसको हम exchange platform पे कैसे लेके आए, खासकर PDs की support के साथ. We will discuss that. I just want to raise some comments on the successful transaction for the power Sukuk, and where does he see, is this going to remain in this ambit, or are we going to see this evolve into something else, into another sort of organism, as Farooq Saab wants it to be? Raise up your comments on the transaction and the future.
Thank you very much. We are very excited and thrilled at the success of the transaction and the way it was executed by the stock exchange. So we are looking forward to a long-term partnership with the stock exchange now. We are already thinking to collaborate with the Securities and Exchange Commission and develop a policy which would require all the state-owned entities which need to borrow funds from the market to have at least a certain proportion, maybe 25 or 30% to begin with, of their loans to be raised on capital markets. So we want now to have a clear policy
Okay,
requiring
and that
all
is
the government-owned entities to rely on the capital markets, at least to a certain extent, to meet their borrowing needs.
interesting.
Uh, yeah, and the electronic terminal of the stock exchange is a very exciting phenomena. We would honestly want to see the savings instruments traded on the stock exchange. And in the long run, we would like to see even the T-bills and the PIBs trading on the stock exchange. That would provide more visibility to Pakistan government's debt and give more confidence to the investors.
Vaisab, you said
Uh,
correctly, visibility is the word. And this is why a lot of people were excited about this show, is because they wanted to see how the exchange platform can be used to bring in visibility and transparency in the local debt market. You know better than me that our partners and specifically the IMF wants us to go into the longer term paper when it comes to borrowing. We've seen that, you know, with the treasury bills, the total amount of the treasury bill portfolio was reduced to 29% in March 2020 compared to over 89% in 2019. And so we are moving towards PIBs, both fixed and floaters. That is where the focus is, and this is what the IMF wants, and they want, you know, the borrowing to be on the longer end of the curve.
that's
Uh,
correct.
what is the debt office doing to support this? And where do you see this direction heading? It's already happening. Do you feel that, you know, bringing in more transparency can have a larger impact, where people are willing to bet for a longer term, not only local investors but international ones?
Yeah, traditionally, the longer term borrowing instruments were only the fixed rate ones.
Yeah,
And T-bills were kind of the only floating rate instruments. But considering that our markets are quite volatile and investors generally have a greater preference for floating rate instruments, we wanted to introduce long-term floaters as well. And now it has happened. We introduced a 10-year floating rate bond uh, about 2 years ago, and now we have introduced a 3 and 5 year floating rate bond also. And we have synchronized the floating rate bond issuance with the T-bill issuance. So we feel that it will help the market achieve a quicker transition from T-bills to longer term instruments. At the same time, we have increased the targets for our fixed rate bonds as well. We think that right now interest rates are neither too high nor too low. And both the government and the investors should be willing to issue and to invest in longer term fixed rate securities also. So those targets have also been increased. And you are right, the strategy is to have a much smaller proportion of government debt in shorter maturities. Yeah.
yeah. So, for example, how can the exchange play a role? I know we're back to the topic where we left off when you were commenting last. How can the exchange play a role? One, in pricing and transparency, and two, how can the capital markets in general assist? Because this market is, in terms of the government institutions borrowing, Rate Saab has a policy. In terms of the way the commercial banks look at our debt markets, they have a certain direction as well, and we've seen their exposure in the PIBs increase too. But what about other avenues? Maybe the exchange can play a role in bringing in other avenues and other channels into this market. And it's a huge market. It's the largest market in Pakistan.
Yeah, yeah. So, there are a number of interesting areas that we can explore and need to be developed, because all debt markets, all markets work in an ecosystem. So the stock market doesn't work alone, and in fact, if you look globally, majority of the investors, particularly small and retail investors, access not just the equity market but also the debt market through three basic organizations: mutual funds, pension schemes, and insurance companies, particularly life assurance. Now, both these industries are quite small in Pakistan for various reasons, but they have been growing. They have been growing quite fast. So I think as these industries grow, they will also allow a broader range of investors to be able to access the market, because it's not always possible for a small investors to go and bid directly for a T-bill or a
Correct.
PIB.
Yes. Yes.
It may
It's
not
not.
make sense. So
Correct.
that is one thing that we need to continue focusing on, to increase the participation. But then, how do these industries also access? Right now, they have to go through the PDs
Yeah.
that have been set up. Now,
That's correct.
one, I think, and that system was basically, I think, set up back in the early 90s or late 80s, when there used to be T-bills on tap. That's the only thing State Bank did. If
Yeah.
you had money at the end of the day, the bank treasury gave it to State Bank. If you needed money, you redeemed it, 5.45% and 6%, and that's that.
Mm.
So that was all changed, and very, changed, extremely well. But I think उसको भी अब review करने की ज़रूरत है कि technology wise, दूसरे instruments wise, how have systems changed in the world, which we haven't really done, and it's been a long time. So, for example, when auctions are happening, how can broader categories of PDs be created, perhaps, that can also access? There could be different categories of PDs, as there are market
Yeah.
makers in other government debt markets. So, example, all members of the exchange can also participate. There could be limits on their participation, but what that will allow is easier access for people like mutual funds, insurance companies, pension funds to be able to bid for government T-bills and government PIBs,
That's correct.
because
Yeah.
it's always,
So
when
do we need a market maker to make this happen, where we can have the secondary market platform do this for us? Uh, is market making a challenge? Do we need maybe a government institution to come in and step in and bring that liquidity in to begin with?
the in the so there are two different things, and we mustn't confuse it. We've spoken about the corporate bonds and the government
Okay.
SOEs, and we are working with the SECP to reform the market making rules for those. So we are broadening the definition of market makers, and banks and other NBFCs can also become market makers. So that will be a good step. Now, for T-bills and PIBs, for the government debt market,
Yeah.
banks already do market making, and the PDs that are there already do market making, but it's done, in the interbank market only.
That's correct.
And the thing is, without we've seen issues anywhere in the world, wherever you have a small closed group of participants, that price discovery is not always the best. From
Yes.
LIBOR to any market in the world you look at, that's an issue. So I think we should look at that. How do you open that up and make the pricing and the trading more transparent in terms of its reporting? If there are any off-market trades, how do they get reported? And that is where I believe the exchange can play, a very helpful role in making that market more transparent. So the treasury bill bonds all over the market do trade in an interbank market.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if we have a link with the market where any trades that happen off the market are reported promptly, just like they're done for equities, so all
Yes.
investors are aware of it. They're also being traded through brokers, so smaller institutions like mutual funds, which are small right now. At some stage, all over the world, mutual funds are larger than not all over the world. In a lot of countries, are larger than banks. The assets under management of AMCs in most developed economies and even developing Asian economies are larger than the size of bank deposits. But we are, somewhere away from there. So if this is being traded through brokers, then those institutions will be more easily able to access. And Habib Bank and other banks are already doing market making in the interbank market. So they
That's
have a
great.
BATS terminal in their treasury. It's very simple for them to also have a bid and offer for 100, 200 million, 500 million, on the BATS terminal
On
as
the
well.
bats. Yes, yes,
So
yes.
if we all sit together and look at it in a collaborative, cooperative way, I think everyone can benefit. The
Yes, but
state bank, the debt office, the banks, and the general investor.
and the general store. That's a fantastic suggestion, and I hope those partners are watching. I'll make sure to forward it to everyone, respectively. Just to come back, just to stick on the local side, Farid Saab, let's take a question from the floor. Is there any way of repricing our long-term PIBs that were issued at higher rates? Now, this is from Ahmed Altaf. It's a very interesting question. हमारी जो mark to market calculations जो अभी फिलहाल हो रही हैं on any side is happening specifically for the PKRV, and the PKRV is a very simple average, right? Let's be honest about it. So it's the sell side, and it's a simple average, and it's released twice a day. And we've talked to the central bank has probably got its own opinions on it, but I think it's about time where these partners who we're talking about, where they all sit together and sort of develop a proper yield curve where mark to market calculations and the visibility of the market can take it to the next level. Your thoughts? Is there any other way of pricing the PIB?
Are you suggesting that the PKRV should be like the volume weighted average price, just like
That is
equities?
that is one option. That is one option. That is one option. I just want your thoughts on the future of the PKRV and whether it is time to develop a more sophisticated yield curve.
Honestly, I don't consider myself to be an expert on the PKRV issue. I think you guys know better than us how PKRVs are determined and announced and what are the shortcomings. And we would be open to any recommendations from the market which are logical and which make the markets more efficient. We are ready to work with you to convince the other regulators, including SECP and State Bank, to change the methodology. Also, my initial reaction is that the concept of volume weighted average price seems much more logical and meaningful. But for that, we need to have a very credible price volume data, which Farooq Saab was referring to. If all the trades were captured in the electronic terminals run by the stock exchange, then we would have more reliable data to compute the volume weighted averages. I think the PKRV system should be reformed and modernized if there is a need to do so. So we will definitely support it.
Okay. We haven't had some feedback from Umar Khan in a while. Umar, I think this question is for you. This is another question which has come from Mr. Muhyiddin Hashim. And I think you'll probably be in a better position to answer this. Our government did an oil supply agreement with the Saudi government. The payments for certain supplies will be deferred. Where does that payable amount show up in the accounts? When will this be due? Shouldn't it be counted in debt as well? In the next fiscal year, both the oil payments and the G20 payments will be due. I think we've already discussed that. So with respect to the deferred oil payment, please.
The deferred oil payment was around 900 million in this fiscal year, and it's going to be another 1 billion which the government budgeted in the next fiscal year. So this payment, which we have already received, this amount of oil which we have already been received, it's reflected in our external public debt portfolio.
Okay.
It's already reflected there, and whatever we will receive in the next fiscal year will be reflected in the public debt according to the same treatment.
Okay.
Under a specific head titled Saudi Oil Facility.
Yeah.
But when we aggregate data, we show it as bilateral loan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Khurram Shahzadur is asking, you guys are really popular. Most of the questions are going to be thrown at you. Need clarity on the issuance of the PKR 450 billion worth of sukuks. Will that be an Ijara sukuk issued by the SPP? Also, do you guys plan on issuing another sukuk to address the circular debt issue specifically? So this would be a local issue.
Yeah, precisely this 450 billion is the same Ijara Sukuk that we are already issuing in monthly auctions. So we are
Yes.
issuing it in installments, and we feel that almost 550 to 500 billion can be issued in the next financial year. So that is the number that is mentioned in the budget. As far as borrowing for settlement of circular debt is concerned, as of now, there is no immediate plan to issue another energy sukuk, but probably it may happen a few months down the road. But as of now, there is no immediate plan for more issuance of energy sukuk.
Okay. Just one final question for the both of you. There is an overseas Pakistani who has asked a question on where should they invest capital securities. So the shorter term, we already discussed this, probably going to be a shorter term issue for overseas Pakistanis. Would you care to share any timelines on that for Mr. Sakir? Or is it too early to say?
We think that the dollar denominated, the new short-term securities, which would be dollar denominated and would be issued by the saving center, but will be issued through the commercial banks. I think that product should be available very soon. But we would urge the overseas Pakistanis to look at the PKR denominated securities as well. We feel that the yields that our PKR denominated government securities, both treasury bills and the floating and fixed rate bonds, are very attractive, considering that yields in the developed markets are close to zero right now.
That's great.
So the currency risk we feel is taken care of, and there is a decent return spread to be made in addition to that. So we would urge the overseas investors to take a serious look at this possibility as well.
Okay, that's yeah. Please go ahead.
One more thing, that this overseas Pakistani certificate will be issued both in dollar denomination as well as in PKR denomination. We have also notified the rate for dollar denomination rate bond bill and as well as the PKR.
Yeah.
So, and there's a if you see the economics of Pakistan, we have highlighted all the features of this instrument in the public debt chapter.
Okay.
So you can get the detail there.
Fantastic, fantastic. In the public charter. For example, we've now touched to the fourth topic of foreign portfolio investment in the bond market. It's a phenomena which we have witnessed at least since I've been covering the financial markets for around 14, 15 years. The amount which we saw through the special convertible rupee account come into the short-term paper was quite impressive. Before we go into how we can market this better, and I'm going to discuss that with Varesh Saab. From your expertise, what I would like is how can we leverage this inflow to our maximum benefit as Pakistan? Because we've already seen, now that we have a market-driven exchange rate policy, we've already seen the inflows and the outflows directly linked to the currency's volatility. So there is that link there between the money coming in through the Sakra. How can we fully ensure that our financial markets leverage, this money coming in, and can it lead to more diversity into other instruments?
We as debt office feel that we need to reach out to the potential foreign and non-resident investors.
Reza, I would like your comments on how we can increase the investor base, and I'll talk to you about that. But this question specifically of Farooq Saab, if you can just give us an outline on how we can fully leverage the amount, and then we can talk about increasing the investor base.
All right.
Nikki, I think both the questions are linked. What Varad Saab was also will elaborate a little later, because the key thing is in any sort of investment you have different type of investors. they're always in an equity offering. There'll be people who'll come in to just flip the share. There'll be short-term
Yeah.
investors. There'll be hedge funds. There'll be long-only funds. And whenever you're doing an offering, and the debt office, I'm sure, also looks at it when they do the Euromoney bond or a Sukuk issue.
That's right.
If pricing is not the only thing, also the quality of the investor that is coming in
Yeah.
into that offering. And I think that is important as we look at people coming in not on such offerings where it's easier to decide who you allocate it to or not, but in something which is essentially happening in an auction. So whoever comes in gets it at that price, or they buy it in the secondary market, T-bills and bonds. But marketing and effort should be to try and bring in investors who have the balance sheet and the interest to be somewhat long-term investors, because obviously,
Yeah.
as we've seen, not just Pakistan, all the emerging markets in the current crisis, that the money that had come in, a lot of it has flown out as quickly as well,
Yeah.
which creates an extra volatility for a country like Pakistan and for the developing countries as well. But if you can market it to longer term, long only kind of debt investors, then I think that serves the country better. And the second thing is that how do you then, once they become familiar with the country, because most investors, especially on debt, will come into government debt because that's the largest and the most liquid market. But now, we have the Sukuk, for example, a 200 billion Sukuk issue. That's a fairly, large sized issue. And the real success would be, can our private sector or our state-owned enterprises also be able to, leverage this opportunity which the State Bank and the debt office is opening up by bringing in foreign investors into the government debt market, कि हम उसका second
Mhm.
level पे फायदा कैसे उठाएं?
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
real activity
Mhm.
takes place then in the private sector or in the state-owned enterprises, जहाँ से you're not just financing the deficit, it's also being used for productive private sector activities.
Yeah. Reza, sorry to cut you originally. I just wanted Farooq's comments on how we can do that. And that, to summarize, the private sector will eventually, play its role, and that connectivity, once the foreign investor comes in, the private sector then starts engaging in further activities in the secondary markets. Increasing the investor base. Now we know we've had some usual suspects in this 1.3, 1.5 billion odd, which has come into in terms of foreign portfolio investment in the fixed income markets. But it's an excellent start. It's not Egypt. We're not at the Egyptian levels as yet, but it is a great start. And no matter what we say about hot money, Pakistan's fixed income markets have finally opened up, and that's important. So how do we now turn this into a permanent part of foreign portfolio investment for the future?
I think we need to reach out to the foreign and non-resident investors on a regular basis. And as Farooq Shah was saying, the stock exchange can help a lot in this regard. If we can have more trading through the stock exchanges, that will provide more information to
Yeah.
the potential foreign investors and more credible data to them. So it will encourage them to invest more frequently and hopefully in longer tenors also. So I think ultimately we'll have to have a regular communication channels with the foreign investors, reach out to them, educate them.
Yeah.
To some
Do you
extent, it's
think
going.
do you think that the
Yeah.
private sector and financial institutions, particularly the large commercial banks, who are PDs and who have very stringent PD requirements, and their PD rankings are also set by the central bank in terms of how well they're doing, how much of a role can they play? And should there be a private public sector partnership with these commercial banks to ensure that Pakistan's medium and long-term papers are marketed on the international level?
Yeah, of course, we believe many of our commercial banks have overseas presence. So we think they can be the leaders in this campaign. And we would be open to and willing to have all kinds of meaningful partnerships with them. Uh, So yes, this is a good idea. Let's engage the central bank also, and let's
Yeah.
see how we can.
Because
Uh,
there is a specialized sales workforce on the fixed income side which is already operating in Pakistan.
yeah,
They just need to take that next step, take it to the next level.
yeah,
Farooq Saab
yeah,
has dealt with many professionals who are well versed on the subject and can go out and now literally market Pakistan because they have the base now for uh, to uh, to bring strength and depth into the market. Any thoughts on
yeah,
that, Farooq Saab?
yeah. You're right. We should all be doing this.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Farooq Saab? We've seen this in we've seen this happen in the equity markets. We've seen it. You've successfully done it. Other houses have successfully done it. We've seen it have happen successfully in the equity markets. Do you think it can happen in the debt markets?
Um, in terms of institutions working with the government to help market them to international investors?
That's correct.
Yeah. So yes, it can because even in the equity markets, in a lot of road shows, government officials have accompanied brokerage houses that have gone for such marketing to investors, because even whether it's equity or debt, the international investors always want to understand the macro level first before they will generally invest, चाहे whether equity में invest करें चाहे bond में invest करें. So that close collaboration and cooperation between government and the private sector is very, very important. But on debt, again, it comes back to the structure of the debt market. And some of the banks, I believe, have gone out and done such marketing activities. But we'll only be able to broaden it if जो जिस तरह हम discuss कर रहे थे कि the PD structure is reformed a bit. How do brokerage houses also, because in the end they will do this because they expect there will be
Yeah,
some economic reward,
that's correct.
right? So, and that is not clear. There is no system for doing that, because but it is an important point that you raise, and if we're able to successfully do that, then Varad Saab can only go on that many road shows at any
That's
point
correct.
in time. But if
That's
there are
correct.
five other people also out there marketing during the year, then you can imagine the outreach, because there are literally thousands and thousands of investors all over the world,
That's correct.
starting from
Searching for
Latin America,
yields,
going all the way to Australia. And,
desperate for yields right now.
finance cannot cover them all.
Yeah.
But banks and brokers, can, because that's what they do, is
Yes.
to educate and service investors. So I think it's really important that we relook at this whole issue and see how we can involve a broader group of intermediaries in this market, which will be for the benefit of everyone.
I know Viret Saab has got to be at another meeting at 5 p.m. sharp, so I'll just take some concluding comments from him. Just coming back to the government, and we've been very positive because in this talk, initially in the first half of it, with respect to the initiative taken, and they're variable, they're open. We saw it happen today before the talk started with the central bank, and we've seen it happen when it comes to setting a fiscal deficit. तनकीद होती है जी, challenges are very targeted. The targets set in the upcoming budget are they're very difficult to meet. However, they're variable and they're open to change. Varesh, have any message for those listening to the talk with respect to the policies of the Ministry of Finance going forward, or what they can expect? You're on mute, Varesh.
I think the market should now have the confidence that the government's borrowing operations are going to be more consistent, more transparent, and more predictable. You must have noticed that over the last one year, um, the issuances in our auctions have remained very close to the targets. So we feel that this should go a long way in giving market the confidence to plan their investments in line with the government's auction calendar.
Okay.
And given that we are going for more strict policies and procedures, not to deviate a lot from our targets, that should provide a lot of discipline and transparency and predictability to the markets. So they should be more confident that the government will do what it is saying. And so they should be able to plan better.
Plan better, and probably place your bets on or for the longer term as well. Learn to place your
Oh,
bets for the longer term.
yes. Oh, yes. As I already said, we feel that this is the right time, both for the government and for the investors, to make long-term
Fantastic.
bets.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us. I know you're a busy man and you have another meeting to go to, Abdul Rahman
Thank you
Mirza.
very much for
It was a pleasure
inviting
having you
us. Thank you.
on this forum. And Omar Khan, thank you for giving your insights. There was actually some breaking news with respect to what you told us about the 1.5 billion target which you have for the Eurobond and the Sukuk for this financial year. And some very positive comments coming from your advisor with respect to when that issue can happen and the rates at which will happen. Also, some good news for the foreign non-resident Pakistanis as well. Thank you both so much for coming, and please do come again. We'll probably, hope to have you again very soon, as we're living in a COVID-19 environment. So the more communication you have with the market, I think it's better for everyone. Thank you all. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Farooq Saab, before you leave, Farooq Saab, before you go, any closing remarks from you on what other initiatives you might see from the PSX in the financial year?
Dekhi, I think we've discussed a number of very exciting initiatives that are happening on the debt side, and I think we can already see the green shoots coming out in the debt market. Although very small, we're seeing increasing trading happening on the debt side in the last couple of months. Post the Sukuk issue, and we will nurture those. We are working closely with the SECP, as we mentioned, to expand and reform the market making regulations, the public offering regulations. So I think all of those will bode well for the exchange and for investors and for our trek holders, moving ahead.
Fantastic. So I won't take much more of your time as well. Mr. Farooq Khan, who's the Managing Director of the Pakistan Stock Exchange, thank you very much for giving us the time on Metis Global. It's always a pleasure. And do take care for all of you watching live on Facebook and on Zoom. Take care of yourselves. Stay in, stay safe as much as you can. We will be also printing out the key points for this talk in the Metis Global News. That will probably document all the important information that both Mr. Farooq and Mr. Abdul Rahman Viraj have shared with us. We will also be the recording for this talk, in case you missed some of it, is also available on the Metis Global Facebook page. Thank you again for joining us. Your feedback is more than welcome on the Metis Global Facebook page as well. Stay in, stay safe. This is Naran Rahman signing off. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Ji. Allah Hafiz.
Thank you. Allah Hafiz.